Good evening, everyone. Would the clerk call the roll?
Mr. Knoll?
Here.
Ms. Atrox?
Here.
Ms. Weltman?
Here.
Mr. Daga? Mr. Lemay?
Here.
Mr. Gentili?
Here.
Dr. Wong?
Here.
Good evening, council.
Behind us.
We have a flag. We're going to say the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
That's Ohio. That's the
Behind you, Mr. Byron.
Oh, there's nothing. Wow. That's not right.
It's a very patriotic word.
It should be left to that.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all for joining us and finding your way here. Yeah, it looks like it's probably enough that it merited being here. So thank you for being here. First, I want to thank the Orange School District and the school board for arranging for us to use this room tonight. It's very kind of them. Their staff has met with ours to get us a little familiar with the electronics, although we do not promise any glitches not to occur. Our first order this evening is approval of the council minutes of June 21st, 23, followed by June 28th. Could we have a motion, please? So moved. Second.
I have one question, Mayor Bain, before we do
Sure.
it. It's something that I've been meaning to ask for a little bit. Is it possible for us to embed our YouTube video link on the minutes to make it easier for residents to glance at the minutes and then like watch the video? Or is that not a possibility now that we have that capability? Is it something we could do or consider?
No, I think we could.
I asked Steve about
do
this.
it. I think we could do it.
Well, the risk that you have is if it becomes a part of the minutes, you have to preserve it forever. And I don't know the capacity of YouTube to be able to access
Right.
in perpetuity. I mean,
Yeah, it's not an intent ever to rid ourselves of it. That's actually a good point.
Maybe that's fair.
When we post them, I know you have to post them in like closer proximity. You know
Well,
what I mean?
they are in
They're pretty
proximity.
close, but
They're like
maybe-
right next to each other, literally.
I thought they were, well,
When you go, well, pretty literally. When you go on the website to read the minutes, the video is
Well,
very
it's on
approximate.
the agenda. The YouTube video is on the agenda. So if you go back to that agenda, you can always click to that YouTube link.
yeah.
But
We'll
Yeah, I'm just
Well,
wondering if it is something that we could consider,
Yeah.
and if it is possible, I think it would be a nice
Anyway,
addition.
I'm sensitive to Mr. Byron's
Absolutely.
forever concern, though. I
Yeah,
think
yeah, that's
probably
fair. Thank you.
All right, so any other discussion regarding the minutes of June 21st? Not hearing any, roll call, please.
Mr. Knoll?
yes.
Ms. Atrox?
Yes.
Ms. Weltman?
Yes.
Mr. Lemay?
Yep.
Mr. Gentili?
Yes.
Dr. Wong?
Abstain.
And next, motion for approval of June 28th.
A second.
Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Knoll?
Yes.
Ms. Atrox?
Yes.
Ms. Weltman?
Yes.
Mr. Lemay?
Yes.
Mr. Gentili?
Yes.
Dr. Wong?
Yes.
Thank you. Our first agenda item is a discussion of the Orange School levy. That's going to be on the ballot this November, and we are honored to have the Orange School Board President, Scott Bilski, here with us this evening, and I invite Mr. Bilski to address council in the room regarding the levy initiative. Need for us to show you how to work the mics?
Yeah. You did off. No, this one's dead. You want me to
How about Manos?
Yeah.
Mike?
Monos would work.
Is this an actual mic or is it
Why
just
use this
recording?
It's just it's a microphone, but it's
Where's the speakers?
this they're
The ceiling.
Thank you.
Okay.
Is that one okay?
Yeah.
Great.
See the blue light.
Thank you, Mayor Bain and members of council for having me this evening. As most of you, I would imagine, are aware, we are going to ask our electorate to support a permanent improvement levy this November. And in case you are not familiar with the permanent improvement levy, we have a current permanent improvement levy that was created in 2003, and it was implemented to help protect our general operating fund. In terms of what expenses can actually be paid for out of the PI, HVAC, roof, roads, sidewalk, security, technology, vehicles, anything that's a long-term capital asset that's expected to last greater than 5 years. What can't be paid for out of the PI would be salaries, wages, benefits, supplies, which are paid for out of the general operating fund. As most of you may or may not be aware, we are now at the end of 25 years of the 1998 Moreland Hills Elementary School bond debt that included the Moreland Hills Elementary School construction, the MUF, and some other capital projects on campus. And anybody that moved into our district in the last 25 years has been paying $77 per 100,000 valuation. Your current bill this month, your July tax duplicate, will be the last time that you were assessed that $77 per 100,000 valuation. So it's one of these things that most people don't realize it's going away, but we do not think that entirely goes away. Our school board always looks towards the future, and to that end, we have a 10-year capital improvement budget that we have. And right now, we have $20 million of known expenses. Now, what is in that? Right now, we've undertaken the refresh of the high school classrooms. Phase 1 is this summer, phase 2 is going to be next summer. That's the better part of a $6 million project, putting a new elevator on the back of the building that's compliant with current rules and whatnot. We do constant and consistent evaluations of all of our buildings. The bones are very good. We always look at the end of the winter, we check the roof, make sure how the roofs are doing, HVAC, the whole bit. But we have public buildings that get a lot of use. Much like our own homes, you have to refresh and update, and that is what we do on a as needed basis here. Our 2003 permanent improvement levy generates right around $1 million a year, and anything that we can't pay for out of that has to come from somewhere. So that comes out of the general operating fund. As I mentioned, we have on a 10-year basis $20 million of known expenses, so you can see that's not enough to cover what our known expenses are. What is the ask in November? We're asking 1.5 mils, which would be $52.50 per $100,000 evaluation for a taxpayer. The timing with the 1998 bond debt being retired of 2.2 mils, $77 per 100,000 rolls off. We're asking our voters to reinvest $52.50, and there would be a net savings with those two issues combined, $24.50 per $100,000 evaluation, what we've all been paying for the last 25 years. If successful, the new PI measure would raise $1.8 million approximately. So the existing PI, the new one would be give us just over $2.8 million if we're successful in November. In terms of timing, we have one shot, because once this rolls off, instead of these two issues combining for a net reduction, this would be a net increase once the $77 rolls off for $100,000. As far as how this affects our general operating fund, once again, it protects our general operating fund. As many of you are aware, we have not gone to our voters for an increase in our general operating fund since 2011. Typically, a school levy is a 3, 4, 5 year expectation, so we're well past that right now. Our neighbors in that time have gone for several of them. So it's anticipated now we probably will not have to go to our voters again for another 2 or 3 years. So it's a good chance to be 15 years in between operating asks, which is truly unheard of. Why is this? A good part of it is because of good fiscal stewardship. A big part of it is because we've had tremendous growth in our district. In Pepper Pike, you look what's happened since 2011. The bulk of Sterling Lakes. In Orange Village, you have the Lakes of Orange, Moreland Commons. So we've increased our tax base by about 25% in that time, which is a tremendous amount. As I always try to remind everybody, we're all shareholders in our district. About 60% of our property taxes go to our schools. A lot of people don't realize that. They think it goes to your city or your village, but the majority goes to the schools. And the schools are a big part of the value proposition for living here. Whether or not you have kids in the school, whether or not you're an empty nester, starting a family, or your kids use a private school, I mean, if you have a good school system, that helps maintain your property values, as we've seen. So what are we looking for? We suspect a lot of people are going to ask you as their elected leaders, what is this? Because they look to you as, find out if there's something on the ballot. So we started reaching out to the mayors in our district communities, and I'm happy to say that we've had 4 mayoral endorsements. And not tonight, but offline, I'd like to reach out to all of you, because any support that you'd be willing to throw behind this issue is going to carry weight to our electorate. But does anybody have any questions about this ballot measure? I cannot stress enough, this is unrelated to what is rolling off. It's strictly timing, and this is a unique opportunity to ask our voters to reinvest $52.50 of that $77 per 100,000 valuation that we are all currently paying.
Thanks for the presentation, Mr. Bilski. I was curious if there were any specific expenditures and permanent improvements that you guys are looking to use these dollars for. Like, do you have a list of potential projects?
The microscopic font here, because there are so many items on a 10-year basis, but the big one short term is the high school refresh. So we're putting in new furniture in all of the buildings there. Everybody is going to come back to nice new furniture in the classrooms. They're re-roofing the academic wing this summer, and next year they'll have the second floor in the basement. This year it's the first floor. We have some different water line issues that have been very pesky, as Mrs. Baldwin can attest to from her time on the school board. And then looking further, we have to replace our turf on our field over here. It's at or past, it's approaching its useful life, so we need to make sure that's maintained. At the end of this 10-year basis, we actually have to look to refresh the Moreland Hills Elementary School classrooms, which is a crazy thought because people still call that our new elementary school. It's going to be well over 30 years old by the time we're talking. But that goes to as much as these buildings get a lot of use, and making sure that they're current and providing the best and most proper education environment for our children there. But we also have to make sure that we allow for the unknown. On a campus this size, you never know what's around the corner, and so we have a lot of things that we know about, but we know the prices change over time, construction costs, labor costs, and everything else. This is a living, breathing document that we're constantly looking at. And if we're successful, if our voters continue to support our schools like they've done in the past, we would have $2.8 million a year to cover a lot of these. There again, it's not everything. We do pay for a lot of these items out of the general operating, but because there are a finite amount of dollars. So, any other questions?
Mr. Bilski, do you have any idea of the impact of these vouchers are going to have on the funds for the school?
That has nothing to do with PI. We're still waiting to see on an operating basis. There are a lot of things that come out of Columbus that they pass them, but until they actually go through the weeds and figure out what the legal intent is and translate things, we don't exactly know. It does look like we are possibly in line to get a little bit more operating based upon what was passed, but we don't know exactly just yet. But this is strictly permanent improvement and long-term assets that would be affected with this ballot measure. That's nothing to do with operating. Any other questions? So if you come up with anything now, if any of your constituents ask you any questions, you know how to find me, please feel free to reach out to me or ask them to. And otherwise, I said I'll reach out to all of you folks offline, and we appreciate any support you might offer. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. I appreciate your being here this evening and informing us about this. It is an issue that I've followed closely at our board meetings that the mayors attend. And I just want to add that I strongly support and endorse this measure on behalf of the schools. And I hope that it is supported in the community as well. We always have supported levies such as this, and I hope that we will continue to do so, as a combined district again this year. So thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
Next, we will move on to the next agenda item, which is a discussion of the walkways pursuant to the outcome of the 2023 community survey. This returns again to our agenda, in the ongoing conversation that council is engaged in regarding the topic of improved walkability in the community. Prior to this evening's meeting, a rather detailed FAQ has been created and published to the city website. I want to thank everyone who contributed ideas to that, what that FAQ could include. This is, of course, an organic document, and there can be things added to it as things progress. Thank you, Mr. Shee, for your very hard work in evaluating the many suggestions and trying to combine common ideas that different people were bringing forward and trying to create a document that comprehended most of the areas that people seem to have a desire to see reflected in this document. I think you did a good job. If anyone in the audience needs to follow along, I know we printed out some copies of this that you may have picked up on your way in the room. If you don't, there's also a QR code that is on another sheet of paper that using your smartphone would link you to the city's website section dealing with this topic. And you can find the FAQ there, as well as also a revision of the review process that Mr. LeMay put out, and that we've also included on the website, and I imagine will be part of our conversation this evening. Why don't we begin with Don? I hope council has had a chance to review these FAQs. Don, if you want to hit any highlights on it. I'm sorry, did I hear something?
Question. We received the email today. Unfortunately, I had a busy schedule with patients today, so I was just going to ask if we can get these documents a few days in advance to properly review them. It was sent at 9 a.m. this morning.
Right,
so.
it was, right, and I appreciate that,
So
Dr. Wong.
it
It
you know, at
was
least
put out
20
as quickly as the
No, I know.
document was produced.
Right.
Rather than wait till after the meeting to present it to council, we pushed it out before. And the desire is always to give as much advance publication of these things as possible. The efforts to create it, though, concluded, around 7 o'clock this morning. So it got out and published as soon as we could. And our apologies to anyone who hasn't been able to read it.
I haven't been able to read it, but
Okay.
I'm
All
going to
right.
read
Well,
it right now.
Well, follow along the best you can, and we will, I'll turn it over to Don, and you can respond to any questions the council may have or comments regarding that.
Could I just take this real quick, the process? I think it's a short, just make a couple comments, because then I have lots of questions for Don, if you wouldn't mind.
Okay, we're gonna, that's fine, there's no particular,
Okay.
I
I just want to let people
Where do we
know,
go here?
I revised this based on comments, the process that I put out a few weeks ago. I revised it, I got plenty of comments from all of you in the audience and from council members to put in a timeline, which I did, put in a decision point, which I did, and put a little bit more process information, how this will work, to make sure that everyone's on the same page as to the process. And just before we get into Don's presentation, and I have lots of questions for Don too, I'm sure everyone else does too. I wanted to get any comments from council on this process. Are you good with it? Can we adopt it in a resolution maybe next week? Any revisions or alterations that anyone has to it? Anything I missed?
I'd like to speak to it. I think you've laid out something that makes sense. It's linear. It lets us look at a lot of the different things and examine and evaluate everything. I think that's all good. And I think one of the most important things is there'd be plenty of public meetings, plenty of public input, lots of opportunities for the people, because I think this is what the people who are concerned about transparency, the concern is well placed. And I know you do, Jim, you want to make this as transparent as possible. And the timeline, I'm curious what you said.
Well, I did it independently, and I think it's flexible. It could go faster than this, depending on how many questions we have and how this goes on. And I noticed that Don's timeline, this is always going to be a next year project from a design and construction standpoint. So it really meshes with what Don put in his document from a timeline standpoint. And that is a decision by council, or if we want to go beyond council, in October of this year, after going through this process back and forth, a preliminary design by Don, and then finally back to council, and then public meetings where we get hopefully last and final input from anyone in the public who hasn't heard about this. And I think there are some people, believe it or not, who haven't heard about this. This has been a wonderful process so far. We've got wonderful feedback from people who are loving sidewalks and the health benefits and the safety benefits and not having to take a car. And then we've got some concerns about privacy and aesthetics and chopping down trees. My goal of the whole process is we take the benefits, we take the concerns, and we weave those into a design process for the sidewalks that makes them even better. So I want to encourage all of you here, whether you're for or against, to welcome your comments, welcome how we can make this process better and the end product even better.
I'd like to add one other thing. In your process, it essentially goes through a lot of public meetings, a lot of discussion, a really deep dig into everything. The decision-making process is the one thing that I would like to add a comment about, and that is, I believe that people have had a chance to look at surveys, take surveys, but they are never had the detail that we've gotten in this, and the detail we've seen in Don's latest that we're going to talk about. And while we got a lot of information, good information from the surveys, I think nobody really knew the details. They didn't know what the cost was going to be, didn't know what things were going to look like. This gives you a much better idea. We haven't seen it yet, but this will give you a much better idea of what everything's going to be. And I think at that point, we need maybe one last public input. And I would like to have everyone seriously think about that being a vote by residents. That way they'll be able to evaluate. If they weren't able to do when they took the surveys, they'll be able to evaluate what things look like, what it's going to cost, the details, and that will be, to me, the ultimate transparency.
Yeah, I was thinking about that, and I didn't put that in here, but I know you and I have talked about that, and a couple of Mono mentioned it, I think, last time. And I wanted to get a sense by going through this process and having the public meetings and kind of seeing where we are on that from a public support. I mean, I'm hopeful that through a design process that takes into account the concerns, that maybe some people who are really worried about the sidewalks could be brought along and think, well, it's not so bad, maybe. But that's why I want input, both concerns, positive and negative. So my thought was defer that until we've had the public hearings, and then maybe open that discussion again if we think that's the right course. That would be how I think about it, but I'm open-minded.
And one thing I'd also like to, one of the things I think we've all seen is the people who are in favor of sidewalks would like to see it done basically right away. The people who are not in favor of them would like us to deliberate more and to reconsider. I just want everybody's voice to be heard, that's all. And that way we get a clear, concise idea of what people really think about. Now, I don't know about you, but I've talked to a lot of residents, but I still don't feel that I have a concise number of where people stand.
So any other comments on process? If there's not, I'd like to just put this in a resolution for next week's meeting.
Well,
I just want to say that, I'm sorry, I share a lot of the same, I think Scott said it very well, that I appreciate this. I especially appreciate the part with the process goals. I think it speaks to how we want to go about our business. So I very much like that. And I do want to make sure that we, that we do this in a very thorough, as you address it here, a thorough, very transparent way. I want to make sure that we do have time to make sure that everybody gets the information, has time to digest it, and give feedback, to council, really kind of evaluated, and the point about having it be one of our, coming to a question of whether we take it to a vote, I think should be, and I agree, included in our final evaluation. So but I appreciate all the work. This was a lot of work. It's one page. I know you put a lot of time into it, so thank you.
The hardest part was getting it and keeping it at one page.
I know.
I'll echo those comments. When I read it, first off, 2 words really stood out to me: inclusive and open-minded. And I really appreciate that you put those in there, because that does need to be part of our process with everybody involved. But my question is I know we spoke about a possible referendum. Would that be taken off the table? Because I think that we need to keep it as a potential option. We may not go there, but I don't want to rule it out at this time, knowing what we know.
In my point of view, and I'm not opposed to that at all. I'm very open-minded, and I could add that or consider a referendum at the time to this, just to make sure it's on the table. If we come to that point of view, for me personally, I'm going to speak out on my view on it and be very clear on that. When we had the mixed-use project for Beachbrook, that vote was taken away from council by petition voters. But I took a view on that. I was opposed to it. And I think, at that point in the council meeting, I will take a view, even if it's going to go to the vote. And I don't know, maybe some of others who will want to do that too. At that point, we'll have a plan. We'll know what it looks like. We'll know where it's going to go. So there's something concrete that we can really look at it and make a decision on. And that's consistent with that timeline, and I think it'd be consistent with if we go forward for Don's authorization for design and planning through the winter. So I will add that to this, and with that, is there any more comments?
Yeah, I have a comment.
Yep.
And I think it's important that we hear from Don about section 4, which is the preliminary design conversation, because I just want to make sure that if council has an inclination to adopt this sort of process, that there's a common understanding as to what that means as preliminary design, because these words can mean a very full-throated and deep dive into design, which would be both penetrating, very expensive, and for a process that ends up with, and then we'll decide if we want to do it, there's going to be a very big expense built in up front. And I just thought Don ought to at least comment as to how he views what's going on, the request of him in this section 4.
Let me give some color on what I intended for that. It wasn't in any incorrect engineering drawings at all. It was really more high level, where will it go, on which side of the street, how will it look, but not 6 layers of compacted aggregate beneath and the specs for this. So to me, it was high level design information, so we know where, when, what, but none of what you're talking about in terms of a full up engineered plan.
Right. Well, just to achieve what you just said, which side of the street? I'm going to let Don speak of this, because I'm not an engineer and I'm not going to pretend to be.
Well, and I just want to mention that if you read the document that Don prepared for us, the FAQs, it explains a lot of that in here. So I think this is now a good time.
Yeah. Don, why don't you grab that mic?
Can I sit?
Yeah, you can sit.
Okay, thanks. Can you hear me?
Is it on? Is the little blue light on?
The blue light's on.
Okay.
You have to talk loudly.
Bring it close to you since you are soft-spoken.
All right, as close as it's going to get. Yeah, I think my concern a little bit is with that preliminary design. Even choosing which side of the street, it takes a little bit of a dive in terms of some of the detail to really say definitively, yes, it should go on the west side or the east side of the street.
I'm having trouble hearing you. I don't think the
It's
microphone.
not working. No. You have to eat it.
Yeah, listen, you should do it better.
How's that?
Yeah.
All right. All right. I'll reiterate the the issue that we get with that preliminary design and really choosing the side of the street, it's not just a quick look and saying, well, it looks like this side is a little bit easier, let's pick that side. We really have to go through and take a good look at all the existing utilities. It involves conversations with some of the private utilities. There's fiber optics out there, there's underground electric in some areas, there's obviously water, gas lines, storm sanitary in some areas. We want to make sure that wherever we put it, we're not putting it in a location where 5 years, 3 years, 10 years down the road, it's likely that it's going to get ripped out. So there's a piece of that that's just sort of research, but then you also get into looking at some of the grading issues and some number of driveways you're going to impact, and some of the issues with grading around driveways, trees, big trees, landscaping, things like that. Those usually aren't too bad of an issue to go through, but it does take some time to work your way through those. I think it's important to sort of lay out what the parameters are, because I don't want to mislead someone saying, well, it looks like now it definitely should go on the east side of the road, whatever road it happens to be. And then we talk to Cleveland Water, and they say, well, in 2 years we're going to replace that entire water main, and now we look a little silly. So that's just that type of an example is part of it. I think we in general terms, we do look at things like, if I'm placing a road on a side of the street that's probably going to attach residents with the largest number of side streets, is one of the criteria. I could look at the least number of driveways that we have to cross, which is a cost to cross driveways. There are big chunks of, say, open space like a college campus or a golf course or something where there's a long stretch where there aren't any driveways. That's probably the preferred side on the surface, but then you still have to look at the utility things. So it's a little bit of a process. I don't want to let people think that we could knock it out in a few weeks.
Yeah.
But that's also saying, how many areas are we going to study? Am I studying 5 streets, 2 streets?
Right.
We may want to decide how big of a net we want to cast.
Yeah,
starting out.
I was thinking about that, the viability of that, and I want to pose this with council, is whether, we've had some discussion about, in terms of the first street, there's a consensus that Lander would maybe be the target for the first one. And if you net this down to a preliminary for one street as opposed to Shaker and every place else, whether, I'm assuming that would constrain it even more and make it more viable to have, again, not final engineer drawings, but just something that people can look at.
Yeah, we could definitely give a better guidelines if we limit it to not try to cover the entire town. And I think we can provide some nice mock-ups and take some existing photographs and figure out exactly where the walk would go in certain areas. People would have that visual. Similar to what we did with the slideshow last council meeting, but maybe in a little bit more detail, maybe a little bit more.
So if you were, just to continue that discussion, if you were rank ordering the key criteria for east or west or north or south, it's utilities is probably one of the biggest ones, and how much work needed there.
Right.
Obstructions, side driveways. I mean, what 3 or 4 would be the big utilities? Would be the biggest one.
Utilities is probably the biggest.
Okay.
Just as a practical matter, it's a public right of way, so there's utilities out there that we really can't control. So we have to work around them or work in harmony with them, I guess. We do get into landscaping. There might be some mature landscaping, mature trees, or mature features that it would really be expensive to work around them, and make more sense to be on the other side of the street for those types of things. We do look at the intersections. We want to make sure that those are safe. There's good sight distance, good visibility for the pedestrians and the motorists at any intersection, and sometimes that's part of the design as well.
How much, and all those drive cost, obviously. If there's more obstructions, more cost, and more difficulty running around. So,
we do have occasionally, a grading issue, a drainage issue on most of the stretches of roadway that we're looking at. We don't have a big stream to cross or anything like that. Everything's pretty well culverted in, but we look at those things as well.
yeah. I'm curious, the rest of the council, does it make sense to focus on Lander as the potential first street for a preliminary plan? Does anyone have a view one way or the other on that strongly?
If you look at the survey from the residents that live on Lander Road, it was half and half.
Mhm.
So in favor and not in favor. So that road, I have a little bit
Yeah.
of hesitation with, just because the residents that answered the survey and live on that street, half were for and half were against.
In some respects, that makes it better for this purpose,
Better, yeah.
just to give them a chance to look at it and actually say, okay, this is what it's gonna be, and it's affecting you, and then, I mean, so I see the
Yeah.
other side of that coin also. But to neck down the next phase of this process and not have Don running all over the city and spending lots of money, having it focused on one street seems to make sense to me. That street connects a lot of streets as well as the shopping center. So I don't know if that's something we can make, or we all can think about it till next week, but just to neck down the next phase of this process, not a great plan, to the mayor's point, I don't want to spend tens of thousands of dollars on a plan we're not going to use for the next year. And if Lander was the likely first, we should think about that.
But on the flip side, I would say that if we were even considering proceeding, and we have to understand what we're doing, and certainly if we were going to proceed, we would need to know in granular detail what it would look like before we even, I wouldn't feel comfortable approving something until I understood really what it was going to be. And so, I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but on the other hand, if we're to do something like this correctly, it's going to cost money, and there's no way to do it. And I know that probably
Yeah.
all of council agrees with me. To do it, to be cheap about it, I know is a concern to me. And I just want to throw in, I know we can talk about it later, but I don't want to forget the piece about Gates Mills Boulevard, because
Right.
that is something that we already have a good amount of grant money. And I do think that putting in an aesthetic design element and taking that look at it is important. I mean, I don't think just because we plan on doing it means that we should slap it up. I think we should make it look
No.
beautiful. And if we have to spend a little extra money to do that, then that's just the way it is.
I
I
couldn't agree more, and I know Tony may fall out of his seat, but I
No,
want to
sorry,
spend
Tony.
more money for.
I'm sorry.
I completely agree with Melanie. We need to understand what this is before we can approve it. I think I'm just saying the same thing that Melanie did in maybe fewer words. And that wasn't, I wasn't saying that you were the
No,
most.
please, no, I like that.
I tend to use fewer words. But I've said this all along. This is a big decision, and we need to know what it is before we approve it. There's a question that I asked early on: is what would the legislation look like that we are talking about approving? I still don't have any idea what that is, because we have always approved infrastructure projects one by one by one. We do this street, we do that street, we do this sewer, that sewer, those kinds of things. I don't know what we're going to do sidewalks legislation would look like.
Well, maybe it could be piece by piece, again, the same thing, Lander being the
That's
first one.
And that's what I think it would be. I don't know how it would be anything else.
Well,
Because as I said earlier, one of the earlier meetings, we can approve sidewalks as an idea, and we can approve Lander Road. And then next year's council can say, no, we're not doing sidewalks. And since you haven't bid out Lander yet, we're not going to do that. Any council can undo the work of a prior council.
But I think two things about this. So Don proposed in this that it's Shaker, Lander, and
Don, try and hit your blue.
Sorry.
Shaker, Lander, and South Woodland.
That wasn't it.
Yeah, right.
Not me. I think we had Landers first, and then Shaker as the two, and the third was actually a portion of Chagrin here to connect the circle to the campus.
think we might be forgetting about Gates Mill, so I would think that would be first, right? And talk about
Yeah.
that. But and it's not included on these numbers either. And can you just remind us, and maybe put it in the FAQ, how much the proposed Gates Mills Boulevard trail is? I can't remember if it was 1.7 million. And then could we also in here have kind of a link of each section of like mileage, like for Lander and Shaker, and just so I can get it in my head, because the numbers kind of look low for Shaker versus Southwood Lander. I don't know why there's a $400,000 difference between those.
It's the length of the street.
Yeah.
It's
So
I
if
mean,
you
it's,
could-
the Southwood one's a lot longer than Shaker, and the Shaker, I think, we indicated we would stop it at Pebblebrook Drive, so you don't do it all the way to Som, which probably saves it, $300,000 or $400,000. The Gates Mills Boulevard multi-purpose trail is really kind of a different discussion. I'm not saying that it's not something that shouldn't be discussed, but it's multi-purpose trail is not the same as these recreational trails we're talking about. So I don't necessarily want to lump it in with this other discussion. We just gave a little brief overview, and we are hopefully in August of this year going to confirm that we're going to get funding for the $500,000 grant. The original budget for that was about 1.3. And we also got another $250,000 for landscaping. So those are sort of the totals on the Gates Mills Boulevard.
1.7 total for the entire project, funded and unfunded? Ish?
1.55.
And I guess, just the concern is that it's such an important project, and I feel like once we've gotten this news, we really haven't focused in on it, and that concerns me because it is something that we've been talking about for a long time, and I hate to kind of have it go to the wayside because it's a bit different. It still goes to the general competition. I don't care if it's in, I don't know if I have a feeling about which document it should be in, but I don't want to see all of a sudden that it's time to start it and we haven't done anything.
Right.
And I mean, this is such an opportunity, and it's also kind of, to a certain degree, there's more to talk about with it because it's a wide piece of land and we have talked about it. I know we've talked about getting some input from like a park kind of consultation. So I just don't want to lose our momentum on that piece.
I would combine it. It's walkability.
I'm
I would
comfortable
keep
with
them
either.
both part of this conversation we're having as this progresses.
Yeah, if I may on the design.
If I may, I will, at some point I'd love to weigh in on this too, because I do believe we're using the words walkways, even in our agenda. That to me means both Gates Mills and sidewalks, and there is overlap in this, especially if we're considering Lander. It would be a natural connection to the Gates Mills path. So that is part of the overall discussion. But, I was looking over our code, and I found it really interesting in, it's 1275, that like site plan development, and granted, this is for U2 properties, but I think that there are a lot of elements in this framework that we could use both for sidewalks, walkways, but also for the Gates Mills path. With it says, property description, proposed uses, setbacks, traffic, utilities, all of this. I think if we're asking applicants to use that type of standard for a project, I think that we should mirror that for ourselves and look at what the standard is. How do we meet that, and what do we need to do to get there? I don't know if anyone else has any thoughts on that.
It's the site plan requirements in that part of the code is what you're saying?
Yeah, for
as a
U2.
rubric for design.
Right,
Yeah.
right. That it's like we're looking at a big, expansive project. Should those be some of the markers that we want to hit with this? And yeah, I can pass it. Like, I don't know if anybody's taking a look at it, but I printed it out.
I think it should be part of the conversation here because, there's residents on both sides that say council's not doing anything, they're not improving walkability, but we are. And we want to focus on Gates Mills as a prize sort of walkability place where people can get together. So I think it should be part of the conversation and the overall numbers too, because adding all the numbers, getting to $6 million, so it's a big expense for the city.
I would like to say one thing though. There is a bit of difference here, and I think everybody's kind of on that. But Don, can you explain the differences in the two?
Well,
projects?
yeah, I think most people really see the multi-purpose path as, it's a biking, walking, and it's a wider path. It's really designed as a recreational path for bike riding, that type of thing. Not that there won't be plenty of people walking on it, but it can accommodate more bike traffic. The other trail is primarily for walkers and joggers. I mean, there will be occasional bike riding, but it'll be primarily people walking and jogging on the trail. The part of the process, and maybe this hasn't been expressed properly, but we can't actually start the design until we get the grant. So we cannot spend a lot of effort and time on starting our survey and laying out the design until we actually get it funded. It's a requirement by the ODNR. We can't just start working on the plans and then hope and then get the money later. Or at least if we do, those expenditures wouldn't be eligible for reimbursement. So
That's good to know.
But we,
yeah, so we don't want to, we don't have the grant yet. We will not have the
for
grant.
that, but we have
Right.
$250,000 for the trailhead.
Right.
Can we start designing there? Can we,
Well,
like, is there part of that
I think it should be. I think it should be a together effort. I think we want to do the layout of the path and those trailheads. If we get funded, which we're literally a couple weeks away from getting funded, it would make sense to do that as a comprehensive piece. And it doesn't happen in a vacuum. We don't just have I'm going to go off to the workshop and design this trail and then I'm going to bid it out. That's not the process at all. So we will go through a preliminary layout process. Put it in front of council. We can talk about different landscape areas. We can talk about the look of it, and we anticipate that we would at least, at a minimum, show put some stakes in the ground and show here's the approximate location of the path. You could walk it before the path is built, and if we decide we really want to go around this mature stand of trees, then we'll decide to meander the path that way around another stand of trees. That's part of the process, but we really can't start that until we officially get funded.
So, Don, I thought I just heard you say that we would know officially within a couple weeks. Is that right?
Yes.
That's in the Ohio legislature,
that's-
right? Rick? And that's part of the bill or something?
That's really not, I mean,
It's not a long wait.
no, it's not a long wait.
It's administrative within, what has to be, the grant has been recommended and put forward by ODNR. We've been awarded the grant.
Okay.
Administratively, within the bureaucratic structure of the state of Ohio, different boards need to now stamp it and say, okay, and until that occurs, it's on, everything's scheduled on and tracking to do it, but
in anticipation
we
of that
won't
happening,
receive the money until that occurs.
what is
So, but-
what is then our role here? So once they hopefully approve, as a council, what is our next action after that happens?
Our next action would likely be to appropriate funding for the design and the landscape architecture of the project. That would probably be, am I right, Don? Would that be
Yeah,
next
so
step?
you authorize a design process.
Right.
And that could
So-
potentially then happen in August.
Yeah.
So,
That would
okay.
be the idea.
Yes, I don't think that this is a preliminary discussion at all. I think that we're on point
So
with what's coming.
So could we have legislation next week that says contingent on the final approval from the city, council is approving whatever it needs to get this next step going?
Are you talking about authorizing a design?
Authorizing design contingent on,
You don't need legislation, you can just make a motion to authorize the design of the Gates Mills project, that's all that's necessary.
We could do that right now.
And the authorization of the design would be done by
Special
Don,
meeting.
or that is a contract
We
with?
don't have it on the agenda.
No.
I just want to, I want to be clear before we motion it, who the design, who is doing that, and who would have approval. Like, does that run through ABR? Does that just run through us? Like, what's the process?
No,
Hypothetically.
that is the retention of design professionals.
Okay.
One of them is Mr. Sheedy, already. And Don and I have been conducting interviews of architectural landscape design people. Or companies, and we'll make a recommendation based upon those conversations.
So
You've been
I
doing
just,
interviews for the trail already? Okay.
I'm sorry, what?
You've been interviewing landscape architects for the Gates Mills Boulevard Trail?
Yes.
Okay, so we're already in the design process.
Well, no, we haven't retained anyone, we're just having conversations.
I think I just heard Mr. Byron say that we couldn't do a motion right now, but we can do one next week.
Next week.
And, I mean, we're kind of up and running, folks.
John, two things on that. In terms of the design, you'll have a preliminary design back to council and then go on with the engineering design. Just walk me through.
What we would need to do is an existing conditions plan, basically a detailed survey of the median, trees, substantial features, and then we would rough out a preliminary design, and that would be something that we would take in front of council.
So we can look at that from just how it looks and feels and
Right.
whatnot, and then.
Yeah,
Then
our initial concept we showed in our
Yeah, I remember.
application, but that's just to get it in front of the board, like this is generally what we're hoping to accomplish, but that's not a hard look at the design. The detailed.
I noticed on our sewer map that sanitaries are at some point going to go into that stretch of Gates Mills. Is that right? And how does that intersect with?
Yeah, the sanitary sewer, Gates Mills is kind of a weird configuration. There's two 60-foot right-of-ways on the north side and south side of the median. And then the median is actually private property the city owns. It's public park, essentially, in the middle of the median. So any sewer would be in those utility areas of the existing boulevard. We just wouldn't put it right in the middle of the median.
The upper portion it went in the median, though, did it not? Or am I
It's in the median, but it's not in the middle of the median. It's near the edges, essentially.
So my obvious concern is we don't want to put all this wonderful stuff in and then dig it up a few years from now. So
Or
that's
have machinery and trucks on top of it.
that's not a concern.
That's not a concern.
That would be a bad idea to do that.
That would be a really bad idea. Yeah.
And we
So
won't be-
it would go in the street basically then the sewer.
Well, it would still go in the grass, but maybe let's say 5 or 10 feet off of the existing edge of pavement in the median.
And so you would, I presume, just design this so we have
The
minimal
path would
trails
be-
going.
Right. The path is really, for the most part, going to be somewhere near the middle of the.
Okay.
And if they were doing work, we would keep all trucks and machinery off and away.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
We can protect it from that type of thing, sure.
Yeah, but that would even go to landscape design and where we plant trees and everything, right?
You look at the whole picture, correct?
Would you not do the sewer before, or?
It's, no, probably not. No, you'd be paving, you'd be putting the path in before the sewer goes in. I mean, there's, for what it's worth, currently there's a water line and storm sewer and underground utilities on both sides of the road right now, so there's, the path isn't gonna be on any of those either.
Well, my question for paving, because there was talk of grant money associated with paving. What's the timeline then for that if we're talking about perhaps infrastructure projects in the roadway?
Paving of Gates Mills, we'll try to tie that to the path. We want to tie the two projects together for paving the roadway. Actually, when we did the sewers on Gates Mills Boulevard on the higher section, we bored underneath the road on all the connections. I think we had one spot where we crossed the street. So.
Okay.
All right. Respectfully, council, this has been an interesting and broad-ranging conversation. But let's bring it back to Mr. LeMay's initial suggestion that he wanted to promote his process that he's advised here. And then I asked for Mr. Sheedy's input regarding his understanding of what a preliminary design process could entail. And I think the suggestion where we sort of diverged in our conversation was Mr. LeMay was suggesting, well, maybe we should focus on a street as opposed to an entire city, which I think ties into Tony's comment that when we approve projects, therefore particular things, we're just like to say, gee, we're approving all sidewalks, which we're not gonna do without designing all sidewalks. We would be proceeding by street, which I think makes sense. Then let's identify a street, and maybe Don could focus more on that, not doing the engineering drawings still, that sort of thing, but even within the limited scope of what is perhaps practical for him to do, to give council a good sense of what would this be and what would it look like, that sort of thing. It seems much more doable if we focus on a street.
I'm in accord with that. And no, I want to say, you had a prior comment about wanting to see the details. And Don and I had a longish conversation this morning about this process. He was very patient with me with all my questions, so thank you, Don. But I asked him that question that you asked, that there would be a preliminary, like we're talking about, kind of a look and feel type of thing. And then he would have a final proposed where it would go, and where, if it has to curve around a fixed issue, it would curve there. And he described to me that sometimes you have no choice, sometimes you have some flexibility, and that he would come to council with that plan, with the details as you're suggesting, and council could weigh in on where you have a choice to do something a little bit different. So that's, I'm fairly characterizing what you
that's
said,
fair.
Don.
That's fair, and I think there are some fixed points that you have to tie into, including some certain drive aprons and certain big utility features and things like that. And there's other areas where you have a little bit more room to sort of meander or not.
So to your point, Melanie, I completely agree. I want to see the detail because this is important. Once we pour the concrete, it's there forever, and so we want to get it right the first time. And so I think, according to the process Don and I discussed this morning on the phone, that we'll get that shot.
Okay, and I like that. And I mean, I think it's obviously probably pretty intuitive. I mean, you cannot bid a project just kind of saying walkways.
In the abstract.
It has, you cannot bid something in the abstract. You have to know exactly what it will look like. I don't know that anybody would want to bid something so broadly. I don't know how you could do that, and that's not how we function. We function based on a project, so that, I like that.
So I don't know if we have consensus on land, or is the way to neck this down a little bit. If we do, or we want to decide that next week, I'm happy either way. Do that.
I'm fine to do it tonight.
Yeah. We're not making a legal decision here. We're just trying to reach consensus so we can get the process moving along.
A lot of the discussions that we've had in road and infrastructure, land has been one of those that it makes a lot of sense.
I think for the reasons that I think Emmy said, it connects up with the Gates Mills Trail. But there's a lot of reasons why Lander seems to be the most logical first step, and I would be comfortable to say that it is tonight and or next week.
So let me get on the next step of that. If that's somewhat consistent with that, is how big a chunk do we want to chew off in the first one from a planning standpoint? You can envision everything from the shopping center all the way up to the circle, or stop at Shaker as the first chunk. I asked Don about economies of scale, and there's not really a big economies of scale for this. They're small, so you don't have to do giant portions to gain a lot of it. So I'm curious on council's input on.
I'd like to see the whole thing. I feel that if there are any hiccups for Lander, if that's what we're going to kind of commit to looking at, if there are any hiccups, we need to see the full project. It can't be, oh, well, this is going to be from Fairmont to Cedar, that, we can't really complete it there. I would prefer to see the whole thing.
Are there any difficulties in any one of these approaches?
No, I think it's important, in my opinion, to see the whole thing, because there might be some driving factor on one section that says, well, maybe we should have switched to the other side of the street, or maybe this other area that's kind of a coin toss if you go either side. So you look at the whole thing, and then I think everybody has a good feel for what that project would look like. Even if you don't build the whole thing at once, you want to see what the plan is for that street.
Well, it's interesting. If you go north on Lander, outside of Pepper Pike, up by the post office, and all that, you'll see at one spot the sidewalks on one side of the street, and then it goes over the other side. And if you're walking that is no fun.
Yeah, there's sort of talk about some things that seem intuitive. It would make sense, arguably, to put the sidewalk on the personal college side, because you have driveways for a big, huge chunk of the stretch between Cedar and Fairmount. But on the other hand, there's one subdivision, Ainsworth, that would have to cross the street to get to it. So, those are the things that you have to look at.
I want to shift gears a little bit if everyone's, for any more comment on that topic. Just, yeah, we talked about Atlanta, there's lots of places where there's stuff in the way. There's hardscaping, landscaping, boulders, timbers. And we had some concerns about residents, particularly on the corner houses where there was a real privacy issue because on corner houses, the sidewalk will be pretty close to the house and maybe really close to outdoor living areas, and protecting their privacy was a concern I heard from some residents. So how do you think about what you just take out and say it's on the right of way, it should be there, or what you say I can do some restoration work, or how do you think about that? If you could just talk to that, be helpful.
Yeah, it's a challenge for sure. There are some long stretches that you can see. Boy, it's pretty wide open. We could run the walk for half a mile without really having any huge conflicts, and then you get to an area where there's maybe some really significant trees, or for whatever reason there's kind of landscaping almost all the way up to the street, and you're going to have to impact it. So I think you try to tread it as lightly as you possibly can. There are times when there might be a few spots where you'd be having to take out some mature trees, and then you decide, is this an area that we potentially want to re-landscape either outside of the right of way or right on the right of way with something that would go in long term. Those are decisions that get made on a case-by-case basis. I think, like a lot of things, probably 80% of this is pretty straightforward. And then there's going to be about 20% that is going to be a challenge that you really have to kind of weigh different, not so great options.
And when you're putting together your plan, though, you'll make decisions in that so we'll be able to see that, take this tree out, or don't take that tree out, or
right. Yes, some of those decisions, we talk about trees and stuff. It's pretty obvious it's something sticking up above, But there are other more subtle things with elevations and grading that you want to make sure that the sidewalk is safe, that it's not too steep, that you don't have any problems with how it's being graded or how it's going to maybe affect the grade on either side. You might have to do some regrading of some tree lawn areas and other things that would potentially affect trees that maybe aren't as evident when you just walking by it.
Another thing Dan and I talked about this morning at some length was the color of the sidewalks. And I'm very big on not having to be bright white because I think they're just more intrusive. And you mentioned that in your write-up about tenting and the technology of tenting. And I asked Don just to do a little more investigation about the cost differential, the technology. He said it wasn't a very common request, but I see more and more, even driveways, they tint them a little gray so they're not bright white, and they kind of blend into the landscape a little more. And I know some of our residents have an objection just because of the aesthetics, because it's just a bright white gash through their front lawn and it doesn't look very good. And some older sidewalks in older towns are slate or they're sandstone. They look, kind of fit in and natural. I know we can't use those; it's way too expensive. Probably not safe anymore. But so I asked him, maybe talk a little bit about. I know there's some challenges you mentioned in doing it.
Right. Yeah, obviously, we're concerned about making sure that whatever gets installed cures properly and is structurally sound. So there are some risks with not sticking to the white curing compound that gets put on the top. There are other options potentially we could look at. We could. Concrete itself does have a grayish color if they don't spray anything on it. You look at some of the walks, even just walking up to this building tonight, they're lighter, but they're not bright white. Well, they probably started out as bright white, kind of. That top surface does, curing compound wears off over time. But there are ways that we could potentially even, fit it as an alternate if we want to see what is the cost. If we want to use either a different material or a different spec. And, I did actually reach out to some of the towns that would send me some information on, and they said maybe 20-25% more cost-wise. And some of those were in what I would refer to as more like a central business district or something where they were choosing to spend extra money because it was a heavy traffic area and that type of thing. It wasn't something they were doing all over town, but there was a specific spot that they wanted to do it. We can look at it. It's not. we don't see a ton of it, but there's always options out there.
Yeah, I did some research on that, Tom, and I talked about this morning, where there's some cities require it to be a certain color, and they require it to be color matched. New York City's had those regs in for 15 years that you disturb a sidewalk, you have to color match, so that in commercial business district, it looks nice as you talked about, but having it be a little, not bright white, I guess, is something aesthetically I think would fit a lot better into Pepper Pike and would help people understand the aesthetic of it if that's their driving concern. So I like your idea of bidding it both ways and seeing what the cost difference would be and how contractors would think about that and do that. So
I think it's a worthy thing to look into. I mean, we are certainly cannot be the first community to address a similar issue, and I think the aesthetics are really important. I think the people who live along the trail, if we would do it, their lived experience is very important. So the proximity to their house, what it would look like if we had to move the trail versus move a long-standing tree, that might be something we want to look into. So I just think that this is, it's important to go the extra mile and to also see if other communities have confronted the same challenges and how they have responded. I know I did also a bit of research and you see some things like that, but I'm sure if we, someone like Don, a landscape group might be able to help us, direct us to the right place to look.
Right, and we do, we represent 20 other communities in the area, and we have some pretty aggressive sidewalk programs in some of those older towns and things like that. So, we kind of see it all, and it usually comes down to a dollars and cents thing and a maintenance thing, and unfortunately, sometimes the best laid plans, you have the sidewalk that looks really nice, and somebody's water connection breaks, and Cleveland Water comes out and cuts 10 feet of the sidewalk out, and they are not going to put it back the way we want. They just are not. So you have to deal with those things too, and figure out that is another potential area that's out there, and you kind of have the thing that sticks out there, a sore thumb. So,
I think as much as I would love to see something other than just stark white, it's been around for a long time that trying to tint concrete is difficult, and trying to match it afterward is even more difficult.
the technology, some cities have that regulation, they're required. It costs more expensive.
I understand.
They do it.
But I think before we make that decision, we should see some presentations on how successful they are when they try to match it, because I think you'll find that it's not as successful as some people think.
Well, I think, when you have to replace a section of sidewalk, even if it started out as bright white and you replace it, it's not going to match. You're still going to have, a sore thumb.
In New York, they do that.
But I'm saying, in normal circumstances, even if you start out with bright white,
Yeah.
and then you had to patch it 8 years later,
Yeah.
it's not going to match.
No, they'll match it. They match it.
No, I'm saying, under normal circumstances. You're saying they can.
They do, yeah, they're required to do it. In some cities, they're required to do it, and they do it. And you won't see bright white and dark and bright, because it's a law, they have to match it.
Well, more than color, I'm more interested in just the, as Don referred to it, the grade through
Meander.
there. The meander, and I really appreciated your descriptions of the meander in there, because I certainly have some opinions about them. That the straighter, less meander, I think it's a more aesthetic, pleasing look, even more so than the color. So I am interested to kind of see the design layout and what we will be looking at.
Yeah, I'm a minimal meander guy myself, so
I'm pretty straight and narrow with a lot of things. So
I think, and I don't know how well it was described, but the problem with picking a really straight shot is you will see that bend around the tree, the hard bend around some feature. If you sort of built in some natural, a few feet around, you could go around that fire hydrant or that manhole or that piece without it looking obvious. And it also,
I appreciate the artistry.
There's a little bit of, it takes a bit to do it the right way. And there are other examples that it didn't go so well, that one too, where it's really pretty extreme. And as whoever the engineer was for some of these, they're dealing with a lot of variables, drainage, elevation, and a lot of landscape features. And when it's all done, it really looks kind of odd.
I said it before, we're retrofitting something.
Right.
And that can definitely be challenging.
Right.
Karen, how do you, taking Lander as an example, if we're going to do that, in terms of feet from the street? I mean, there's some places where the tree lawn disappears or it's very skinny, which looks to me very unattractive. We've got, on Lander, we've got 15 feet to work with on the side of the
The
road?
grass area on Lander, I believe, is 29 feet.
29 feet on either side of the
On
road?
either side of the road.
Okay.
The
So
86-foot wide right of way is a really wide.
it's
road.
huge. So there are a lot of plantings and other things that people have put in that are definitely in the right of way.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. And so how are you thinking about these for Lander in terms of the size of the tree lawn?
Yeah, well, again, part of it depends on the side of the street you
Yeah.
choose. The poles, I think, are about 7 or 8 feet off of the curb.
On the east side?
On the east side.
Yeah.
So, you're going to be beyond that with the sidewalk, generally speaking. You're not going to run it directly under the poles. It would be just a little bit east of that, I suppose, if that's the side you choose to do it. So you're probably 10-ish feet from the edge of the walk to the curb would be a pretty fair number. And then, if you meander, you might go in a couple feet or out a couple feet, but that would be the range.
Okay. So that'd be a sizable tree lawn that you could have green space and...
Yeah, 10 plus feet. And there's more detail than you want here, but you have a
No,
road
we
and
want
a
the
drive
detail.
apron, and that person pulling in with the car, to get the car in the drive, the sidewalk may have to dip down to get to that lower driveway and then come back up. So as you push it closer and closer to the street, you end up with a kind of a pinch point. The street's not moving. The
Yeah.
drive apron's not moving. The only thing that you can move is sort of the sidewalk. You can move it a little further away so that you hit a certain elevation. But as you get closer and closer to the street, you really limit your ability to make the grades work.
Okay.
So there's sort of the extra dimension is the height on that.
But again, I want to make sure that we are minimizing the impact to privacy of residents. And the closer we can push it to the street with a reasonable tree lawn, I really think that that's important, especially a street like Lander, that we have a dedicated bike area on there. It doesn't need to go the maximum into somebody's property, even though it is the city right of way. I'd like us to really respect that.
Yeah, I think that there's a pretty good spot there that it can go that finds the balance. Not on every lot, but on a lot of them, there is a pretty good gap there.
More questions regarding Don's FAQs?
Just a minute.
We may have more next week, just because we did get
Yeah,
a bit of a last minute.
yeah.
Mayor.
Kind of running on our phones, I think.
This is me at lunch on my phone trying to get through it today.
Yeah. Oh, Don, just your cost estimates in here, and I know it's probably still somewhat back of the envelope a little bit, but is that all in, so to speak, from your fees all the way through the last piece of landscaping we need to restore? Is that your?
Yeah, it should be. Again, the landscaping is a variable. If you should decide to do a lot of additional landscape work, that's something that can go quite a bit higher. This gets the grass replanted and some trees, but it's not some extensive landscape plan on these areas.
And to the extent you've done these in other cities, and they wanted to dress it up a little bit with some grace notes of plantings, either at an intersection or. Can you give us some examples of what people do if they do some of that?
Well, there are towns that pick out a motif or something for certain intersections that they want to, create a little bit of a planting or a flower bed or something along those lines. We, on the engineering end, I always caution that you don't want to create a sight distance problem at the intersection
Right.
for a pedestrian or a car. So usually lower things that would be closer to the road, and then really a lot of towns have a normal tree planting plan for the tree lawn areas or the front lawn areas, and those occur 1 or 2 trees per front lawn. Might be the-
So to the extent you have to take down some mature trees, I mean, I could see that you might want to replant some of those in certain cases. Is that
Yeah,
reasonable?
I think it's not uncommon to do that. Yeah, to have a plan. I think what you run into is really you don't want to plant trees that are going to get big
Right.
in the right of way. So if you're going to choose something to plant in the right of way that the city's going to plant, it should be something that's ornamental, or you get some type of an agreement with homeowners to say, why don't we plant this 10 feet back from the right of way, and then we don't have to worry about cutting it down at some future date.
Well, I think that's important to prioritize. If we were to take trees down in one of these areas, those homeowners, we usually plant trees every year. And if we're really trying to preserve our tree canopy, I think it's important that we prioritize the trees we are taking down as part of the project and those homeowners and let them have some say in it. If we were to go forward, I think that would be something we should focus on.
And perhaps extra, maybe like a 2-for-1.
That's true, because if it was a very mature tree, you don't always know how well some of these smaller trees, I know we don't put in the tiny ones, but to make sure we have success.
So other than the occasional tree and maybe something at an intersection, if you want to soften it a little bit, that's kind of it in terms of what you've seen people do.
Generally, for these kinds of, for the pedestrian trails, I would say that's most of it. Anything that you put in that's heavily ornamental or there's a maintenance replanting, or you're going to plant annuals, all that kind of stuff. And it sometimes requires homeowners to maybe adopt that space. And if they want to do it, they might do it on their own, but it doesn't have to be.
Yeah, in my research, I saw plenty of really bad tree plantings next to sidewalks, and the sidewalks were like this a few years later, so I get that. Yeah.
There's lots of images out there like that. And we also don't want to plant anything that's going to create root damage long term to the sidewalk.
Question. So I see Lander, Shaker, Chagrin, South Woodland. Are these the only ones we're considering at this time? Because I remember there was a potential trail at Park Synagogue or something like that we were talking about a few years ago. Is that coming into any of this discussion, or that's kind of nothing now? Or
That wasn't part of what we were covering under this. This was really trails that were going to be on the sort of the major roads in town. So, and I'm not saying that Park Synagogue piece isn't something that could happen, but I don't know where that's at, to be honest.
I think to Tony's point about piece by piece is the way to really think about this, and it focuses our attention on one area, and discrete budget is street design, and then we think about going from there after that, and we'll have both the Gates Mills and this other project kind of at the same time, so that's a pretty full walkability agenda.
I would still encourage resident feedback for all of the areas that we're considering, even if we're honing in on one specific. I think we should, that doesn't stop the conversation of all of the others. So I want to make sure that continues.
I agree. So I'm thinking just in terms of publicity for a public meeting of this, having the map that would show the other streets, like you've mentioned in here, where it's contemplated, so people get a sense of the overall potential of what we are thinking we could do or would do. I agree with you, so that get the bigger picture, even though we might just be focusing on Lander as the first.
Right, I want to make sure we're still having the overall overarching discussion.
That's all I have for right now, Mr. Mayor.
Anyone else? All right, well, thank you, Don. We are going to move on. We'll get Claudia's comments later.
I have one question about the second presentation that we had last month. Have we been emailed that yet?
Yeah. I saw it. I got it.
I got the one from the 21st, not from the 28th.
I think both on the website too, Tony.
Pardon?
On the walkabilities tab on the website, I believe that they're both linked on there.
They're both there? I looked at it earlier today and I only saw the one from the 21st.
Okay.
We'll check on it, Tony. I thought they were both there. If they're not, we'll make sure.
Okay.
Can you ever speak to the schools about the chagrin piece, and kind of the bikes and walking to school? Do we ever follow up on that? I think we have something here from the school board.
Tony, it's not on there. That was a good catch. It's not on there. I just looked.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I thought we were gonna get an email.
Tony's correct, it's not
Tony
on
is
there.
correct.
It's not on there?
It's not on there, so we need to update that.
We'll follow up on that, Tony.
That was a
Thank you.
really good catch, yeah.
In terms of having a discussion with the school board or the schools about the chagrin path, that was the question.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm having, with your mask, it's hard for me to hear you. I have had a conversation with both the school superintendent as well as the school board president, and neither of them, and both of them tell me that the schools have no objection to a walkway going up Chagrin Boulevard to the school campus. That is just as we don't tell the schools, you know, how or when they should permit their students to be on or leave campus, that they have really no comment regarding our bringing a walkway up. That, you know, if kids are leaving, they're leaving anyway, and if, in my mind, if they're leaving safely, at least they're leaving safely. And one thing that our conversation led to also was noting that when school is not on in session, you know, throughout the summer months now, other times of year, that people, and it's not just students, people come up to this campus, and walkability might be an option for them. In the summer, kids come up here playing, and families come up here to use the pool features, the baseball fields, soccer fields, whatever, and they just don't have. They express no objection to our bringing a pathway up, and I assured them that the city had no place or interest in telling the schools how they regulate their children and how they come to or from campus, and that's for them to enforce, and they agree. So that's how the conversation went.
Was that a phone call or?
I'm sorry, what?
Was that a phone call or was it?
It was both.
How was it communicated?
Yeah, I
Writing?
spoke with both the superintendent and I spoke with Mr. Bilski.
Thank you.
I can't remember if there's finally an email or not. I'll have to check on that. I mean, I don't remember.
Okay. Yeah, I was just curious. Thanks.
Is there anything else, Council? Okay, we will then move on to, we'll end Council's discussion of it for tonight. I know there may be audience comments still to come regarding it. Do we have any committees to report tonight?
We have plenty of zoning. So we had this was regarding a request for a variance. The backstory is that we had a house that was originally cited for a prefabricated above ground pool, which was not allowed under our ordinance. It was discovered because the house was for sale, listed for sale, that the above ground pool was in fact there. It was brought to the attention of the building department and it had been in place for 6 years. There had been no inspection or permitting and a citation was issued. So then the owner came to Planning and Zoning to appeal the citation, which was denied. At the following meeting, the month later, they came to Planning and Zoning for a variance. It was now, and I guess...
A new owner.
A new owner, exactly. It was a new owner who admitted they were aware of the violation sometime prior to closing. The key question was, do we allow a project which is in clear violation because it is in place and there will be costs to remove it, a self-created violation. And the decision was that the variance was granted It was not unanimous. It was granted for 5 years, referencing the useful life of this pool and requiring a property inspection and also inspection of any mechanicals and the related fence that was later put in at some point. And I think that's pretty much summarizes it, if anybody has any questions. Okay?
Thank you, Melanie. Department heads, you have to speak up if you're, or Don can pass his microphone down.
Nothing new.
You want to say that to the microphone?
Nothing new to report.
How about you, Mr. Advent?
Music in the park tomorrow, so I didn't pick the band, so I don't know who that
I can
is.
talk to that.
Jazz band, I think.
No, it's not a jazz band. Tomorrow night, the Colin DeSault Blues Project.
Blues Project, that's
will be at Pepper Pike Park. They've played here once before, several years ago. If you're not familiar with Colin, I'd encourage anyone who enjoys great blues music to come to the park. Colin is probably the successor to the Mr. Stress Blues Band that was very popular in this region years ago, many years ago. And Colin plays a wonderful blues harmonica, and it's a very high energy performance. And I think anyone who goes to hear it will really enjoy themselves. There is a prediction of some rain tomorrow. It will be under the pavilion, so I think anyone who comes can stay nice and dry and enjoy the music. And it should be a very good time. So I think that's what you're going to say, Mr.
That's exactly what I was going to say. If it's raining, they're probably still going to be there.
Anything else? We have, thank you. Engineering, why don't you catch us up as to what's going on?
Okay, the Shake Boulevard project with the utility companies, AT&T, are going to be done by the end of this week. So really, and then our contractor will be remobilizing to complete the storm work on the last section of Shaker. So really excited about that. We also have our 2023 pavement maintenance program, which includes a pretty good chunk of South Woodland Road and also Butter Wing up in the Lavian subdivision. That will likely start within the next week or so. Contractor owes us timing on that, but it's possible that they might actually start doing some milling middle part of next week on both of those streets. And that's going to take a few weeks. It'll be a pretty quick operation, but it's probably a total 30 days from start to finish.
Thank you. The police chief did not mention it, but we continue with our police testing program and evaluation of potential officers to join the force later this summer even. We do have some vacancies in the department that we need to fill. The other public service announcement that I will reiterate, the code red that the chief sent out earlier in the spring, that it's not often, but every now and then there is another car stolen in our community. And the latest one followed the very consistent and uniform pattern of an unlocked vehicle in the driveway with a key or key fob inside. So, and once again, urge everyone to lock their cars. These are not forcible entries into the vehicles. I don't know if we can fix that, Chief.
Like you said, nothing new, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
You're right. It's nothing new.
Yeah.
You're exactly right. Chief Frazier is at the Ohio Chiefs Association conference this week, so he's not with us this evening. And I will not reiterate my entire spiel regarding the Column to Solve Blues project. So I don't know that I have anything. I do want to thank, we had a movie last weekend, and even though it was raining, thank you to the service department for hosting the movie inside the service department. We had Christmas in July here in Pepper Pike, and some stalwart enthusiasts came out for what in December would have been a blizzard. Instead, it was simply raining. But they all gathered together in the service department, and I think they had a very good time. And the guys, as always, are wonderful hosts, serving the free snow cones and popcorn. So thank you to our service guys. That's all I have. Council, any comments?
I have one. I attended the planning and zoning meeting this week, and unrelated to the project, there was a gentleman who came and spoke from Belgrade that he was noticed and mentioned that they're having some issues with flooding and stuff on that street. So I just wanted to make sure that we were following up with that, since it wasn't, at a regular council meeting, that it was said somewhere else. So I just wanted to make a note of that. And see if we want to
We're
reach out to
looking at
them.
it, trying to determine what could possibly have caused this water issue that you described. It's not been identified.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to make sure that we keep a finger on that. And I will say the movie in the service garage, a new title for it, was a roaring success with my daughter and her teenage friends. Lots of fun, so thank you.
Well, I was happy to stand in the parking lot and direct people to the service.
It was a lot of fun, despite the weather.
We have to work on our signage for that, Mr. Adams.
Has a nice ring.
Just two things. I think, Scott, you want to announce the Road and Infrastructure Committee meeting for Monday?
Monday, 7:30 a.m., Road and Infrastructure Committee meeting. We will talk about a variety of things, among them the remaining projects that are currently on the books. The public is invited to that if you want to come at 7:30 in the morning.
And then second, I know it's still summertime, but winter is coming. I was wondering if we could discuss at a council meeting the possibility of winterizing the bathroom, if that's a possibility, because we've had a lot of residents, express their concerns with that, and if we are improving the walkability, we should probably think about the potty too.
We have not had any. I think there's been one person who came to a council meeting, actually, to express their concern about that. This one guy. And we don't have a plan, Councilwoman, to winterize that bathroom. If council wants to explore winterizing that bathroom, I suppose if there's that desire, we can look at it. We haven't been looking at it as to doing it.
Particularly if there's possibly next year some grant funding out there. I don't know if there is, but I know that occasionally people have mentioned it to me.
I had an email last year from another resident, and then the resident who came here that lives on Bolingbrook, who expressed his concern. So I think if we're going to be having more public areas, that we should think about having at least a bathroom available in winter.
Maybe just understanding the costs, so we can decide if it would be a winning
Yeah.
project.
Okay,
Maybe apply for that
we'll
grant.
take a look at it and try to get
Great
some
idea.
costs to council.
Especially, if we're going to build the Gates Mills pathways. That's right between
Yeah.
the Beechwood trails and ours, and it would be nice.
We can look at it. Jim, so try to cost it out, figure out what would have to be done.
Maybe for the May grant,
You wouldn't be able to use a grant for that.
No?
That's probably, if you're gonna,
Can we build a
if
new
you're gonna do
bathroom?
if you're gonna do a grant, my interpretation of it is if you're doing a grant, it has to be for something new, not an addition. Not like that kind of,
So an improvement
it's an
doesn't fall
improvement,
under.
yeah. I mean, there's a couple of big factors.
Council,
One of the big factors is heating it all winter long for one person.
the council utilized a Nature Works grant to
build it
construct that
originally, yes.
initially.
Yeah.
So I think getting an additional grant for that same project is not.
They put a bathroom next to the non-winterized bathroom. To have 4 bathrooms, perhaps. Just thinking outside the box.
Okay. Anything else? All right, then we will turn to audience comments. Just please speak up.
Hi, my name is Lisa Skupka. I live at 30449 Shaker Boulevard. I'm the little white house at the corner of Shaker and Lander. I'm really distressed over this sidewalk project because we haven't even finished the sewer project. I don't even know how much I'm going to have to pay for that sewer project, and it distresses me greatly that money is being discussed, and it sounds like it's a done deal for these sidewalks, that money is being discussed to build these sidewalks, which will impact my property greatly, when we haven't even gotten final okay for finishing up this project. They haven't even done the soil correctly on my property where they put in the hookup station. And I talked to Mr. Shee about this earlier, that it feels like, when you walk on it, it feels like quicksand because they sink. And the landscapers can't put the lawnmower on there to cut that part of the grass, because if they do, they may not be able to get their lawnmower out of that grass. They took all my clay, and I don't know what they put on top of it, but it's not stable. I don't want the city to call me and fine me because my grass at that part of the lawn is too high. So that is a concern. The cost of this sewer project and the cost of these sidewalks is overwhelming to me. My property has 3 utility poles on it on Lander Road. I live on the west side, the east side of Lander Road. I have 3 utility poles on my property. I have a fire hydrant on Shaker Boulevard. I have a Dominion gas station on my property. And now you're talking about putting sidewalks on my property up to 29 feet of egress, of public, whatever that is called, public use. I find that disturbing because from the curb to my side door is only 75 feet. And if you're talking about going up 29 feet, I'm going to lose that whole side of my property and have an additional public utility on my property. And if you come on the north side of Shaker, you're going to, again, that's the same problem there. My corner property currently has more public utilities than any other property in the city. And now you want to put sidewalks on that? I don't like the sidewalk idea, but if you're going to put them on there, put them on the west side where there are less utility poles. There is just as much open space or more on Lander Road from Chagrin to the Gates Mills Circle. The sidewalks that you have already installed on Chagrin are on the north side of Chagrin, and I went and I measured that, and at the closest part to the curb, they're right to the curb. They start at the curb and they go back 5 feet. At the widest part, which is around, there's some of the meandering, and at the widest parts, they start at the curb, and at the end of the sidewalk, they only go in 10.5 feet, which means, I went out and I measured it today, which means the grassy area is only 5.5 feet from the curb. Why are you talking about going 29 feet in my property? That's disturbing and distressful. You can hear in my voice how upset I am about this. You put the sidewalk on the west side of Lander, and again, it sounds like it's a done deal. I don't think it should be, and I think all the residents should have a vote. It should be put to a referendum so we can all vote on that, not rely on council. I'm just...
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you
I'm
for
not
your
quite
time.
done, but I am almost done. I just have to catch my breath here for a minute. There is a consistency factor with the sidewalks. If you're planning on putting it by Ursuline College, which is the west side of Lander, and we already have a sidewalk on Chagrin at the north side of Chagrin, which feeds into the waterway station, why not make that sidewalk consistent on the west side? Because then you could walk from the Gates Mills walkway, whatever you want to call it, that is not quite being built yet. You can walk all the way down Gates Mills, just turn the corner onto Lander, and you don't have to worry about crossing that big circle area. And then walk all the way down south on Lander till you get to Chagrin Boulevard and do your shopping at Eden Square. I'm against this, but if you're gonna do it, consider all the residents that have all those utility poles already on our side, on the east side of the street. Don't put it there. It just doesn't make sense.
Thank you. In the back row, the gentleman.
Richard Ferguson, 29200 Edgedale Road. I have 6 items. I just list them off as just design considerations, if you will. If we're going with a hardscape concrete sidewalk, can it be a permeable one so we don't have additional just runoff? We can soak into the ground rather than running down and adding to that natural problem. 2, snow removal. I assume it's going to be the responsibility of every lot owner. I've lived in various communities where you had public sidewalks. One homeowner cleans it, the next one doesn't. People are walking out into the street. This is in the winter time when you have heavy snows. 4, for roads that have high density traffic already or proposed to have high density traffic in the future, would you consider putting pedestrian bridges in rather than having crosswalks at the pavement? Public safety issue. Is there any consideration with ODNR about wildlife disruption issues? I love walking around at night. You see a lot of deer, sometimes you see wild turkeys. What will this do overall to possible wildlife in our community? 6, as you're talking about, some of these roads have a big right-of-way. I assume that was built into the original design for future expansion. Do we have any long-term plans when some of these roads like Lander or some of these others might have to be widened due to increased traffic? Then another public safety issue, we have sidewalks in, we eventually want to put lighting in there somewhat. Or will residents be allowed to put lighting in? And there will be a guidance, do you have a low-level lighting? Just for safety issues. And that's it.
Thank you, sir. And just so I would commend anyone, you can catch up a lot of maybe your basic questions regarding this by reading the FAQ that is available on the website. And for instance, there is no maintenance or snow removal obligation for what is being discussed for any of our residents. So for that, you can, be relieved. Okay, anyone else? Yes, please.
Jennifer DeMue, 29200 Edgedale Road. I'll keep it short and sweet. I think that this issue is broad enough that it should be placed as a vote by everybody because there's too many people affected. Thank you.
Anyone else? In the back corner.
Okay, hi. My name is Arthur Broad. I live at 2870 Brainerd, and I would also like to support the idea of a public referendum because I think it affects everybody in the city. And I know there was a survey. I don't know how widely answered that email survey was. So this way it was publicized. Everybody could get a chance to voice their opinion in an election. And I think that would be the most fair to the residents. And I also have one question. Let's say if it did pass, who would be responsible for repair of the concrete? Because over time, concrete always cracks. Tree roots always get underneath there, and there's always upheavals. So I want to know who is going to be responsible.
It's proposed the city has any maintenance responsibility.
Okay, but I still would like to propose that a referendum be held.
Anyone on this side of the room? Yes.
Hi, Jackie Godick, 27 Hunting Hollow Drive. Addressing the referendum issue, I would like to point out the dates, especially as they line up with the process that's been proposed, to get something on the November ballot, which, that would line up well if you're looking at September, October for the final step in the process. That needs to be in by August 9th. which obviously is a really tight timeline. And then the next election after that is until May. So I think you need to think about if you're proposing wrapping up the process sometime this fall, then you would potentially have to wait another 7 to 8 months to actually vote on it. That just seems like a lot of dead time sitting and waiting. So I don't know how specific the referendum would be. I don't know if you're actually putting a plan out there or just a simple, do you want walkways on these streets? Yes, no. That seems like it would be easy. It could be done by the August deadline. Get it on the November ballot would make a lot of sense just with the whole timeline that you guys have laid out tonight.
No, that would have to be addressed. Thank you for your comment. If a referendum were to be on this November's ballot, it would have to obviously be adopted by council and submitted before the August 9th deadline. We have one more meeting next week. If council wants to do that, you need to be in contact with Mr. Byron, council, pretty quickly. But thank you. Mr. Daff?
Manny Naft, 2632 Sound Center Road. Right now, I'd like council to consider, and please address this at the next council meeting. We've never really discussed in the council meeting what the overall outcome was of the survey. Some people identified that 74% of the people wanted sidewalks on here. But if you look at the results that were asked for originally, what were the people that really lived on those streets that were affected? And again, back to council directly, a lot of other cities we have council, in general, in regards to council people represent all of the residents. In other cities, council people represents different areas, different zones. And in some areas, they have wards. If the whole population wants to have a sidewalk or a shopping center put in, not only does the overall city have to approve it, but those people that are directly affected have to approve it. So that it's just not the larger number of people, overwhelm the individuals that it directly affects on here. And looking at, the results that were then asked for in regards to breaking out by people that live, on the streets and so forth. Right now, 74% of the people said that they'd like, sidewalks. Okay, 48% said I like sidewalks as long as it's not in my front yard. Okay, and there's been no discussion at all. There's been no discussion at all what's being done to protect those fewer people that live on these streets that are affected. And I think the council really should address that, in the discussion. And if this goes to referendum, which I think that it should go to referendum, that everybody should have a formal vote on it. But then something has to be there to protect the people that it's directly affecting. Because one person made the comment about, streetlights. Well, that'll be the next item that'll happen in regards to. So the overall item is, we have council at large. Okay, what is being done to protect, the people that are directly affected? And again, nothing has ever been talked about here in regards to the 48% on there. And I think that that's something that's definitely missing. So, thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Sandeep Modi, 2450 Cedar Lakes. I have a question, whether you answer or not, but you go down the process of examining land of road. What do you expect to do after you learn all that information? How does that impact the rest of your decision making?
To me? Yeah, are you asking me?
I'm asking you.
Well, I'm not sure I understand your question. So we talked about doing this segment by segment, just so we can focus on one segment.
Is council saying you're only going to vote, assuming there's too many assumptions here, but I guess what I'm asking is, you have X data that will show what the design looks like on Lander, right? What do you do after that?
Under this process, once we have the preliminary plan in place in the public hearings, we would vote on moving forward with that, or send it to a referendum, which we also discussed. So one of those two things.
Vote on Lander or vote on everything in the scope?
As we talked about, we can't authorize funding for anything except with a project plan and a budget. So we would vote for this as the start. Now, what I propose is that when we have the public hearings, we have the master plan. I think Amy raised this point, or Melanie did. Everyone should see the master plan, which is on Shaker and South Woodland, and so council should come to a consensus on what the end game looks like in terms of placement of sidewalks, in addition to focusing on the Lander one. And I would want council to vote on the overall plan, even though we're only going to authorize budget for just one at a time. Does that answer your question?
That answers it. I think it doesn't make any sense and it's convoluted.
For me?
I think that doesn't make any sense that you would focus on one road and not the entire plan.
No, we're going to focus on the entire plan and have public hearings on the entire plan to show the extent of the sidewalk network that we would propose doing, as outlined in Don's FAQ, which is our Shaker, so that I would want the public hearings, which I propose my process, to have the mailing go out showing all the streets where we're proposing to have sidewalks, so that everyone has input and can see the big picture. And then either the vote on council would be for the big picture, we're in favor of the sidewalks writ large, but specifically we can't authorize it until we have a budget on street by street. So there's two parts of that. But I want both. I want the big picture and I want the specifics.
Thank you. Who else? Lynn?
Hi, my name is Paula Lang, and I live at 31099 Gates Mills Boulevard. And I'm also here on behalf of our new neighbor, Michael Clarissa. And so we've lived there for 14 years. You know, like every single every day of those 14 years, we walk dogs. I mean, we have dogs. We've always had dogs, and it's always been such a struggle. If you walk them in the median, you know, it's very uneven. It's so easy to turn an ankle. Like if the grass doesn't get cut, you know, like now, like our dogs are getting bitten by bees because I think the median has gone eco-friendly, which is fine, and they don't spray for the clover and stuff. But now the dogs are getting bitten by the bees. But anyhow, you know, when I walk in the road, over the years, I've noticed drivers have changed. Like I get angry gestures, I get people shouting at me and who knows what else. And I'm always very polite and I always wave and whatever, you know. But they're so angry. So they don't want you in the road, and then sometimes it's hard to be in the grass if there's too much snow or if it's wet and the dogs don't want to get their feet wet. So I'm just like, well, where am I supposed to go? So now what we do, and then there's so many fast drivers, and with all the new technology in cars, a lot of people do not make eye contact with you when I'm walking on the road. And I can usually, by now, because I've been doing it for so long, I can figure out those people, and I just step up onto a driveway curb. So I truly, so my part of Gates Mills Boulevard is between Cedar and Ursuline Circle. So I truly hope that someday the walkway trail will go beyond, because I believe it's only supposed to come up to Ursuline Circle. It's not supposed to go all the way up to Cedar Road. But I feel like it would be such a benefit and such a safety measure. The people that drive so fast with like motorcycles, and there's like racing, students from school getting out. I mean, like it's really quite dangerous. And then when I see our neighbors and I see families with strollers, I just get nervous of as pushing their strollers on the road, because they want to get out and they want to enjoy the neighborhood that they just moved into. So I'm all for the walkway trails and hope at some point they will happen.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Hall.
Hi, I'm Brad Hall, 29226 Edgedale Road. And I wanted to speak also just about the process. I also feel that this thing should be put up for a vote. I guess the point is that if it goes up for a vote and the sidewalks win, then you've really got a durable project. You've been talking here that, maybe a future council could vote it down. Well, if you had a solid vote behind you, rather than just a survey, then in the future, a futures council would have trouble stopping it, reversing it. So I think the long-term outlook would be better for a solid walkway if it happens that way. I mean, if the vote went against it, then you wouldn't build it. But still, to have a good, solid project, I mean, I would think you would want to base it on a walkway, because otherwise you're always going to have the people who are anti-sidewalks always, saying that the survey was not something to really rely on, as we've heard in many comments here already. But that's it.
Okay, thank you, sir. Mrs. Hall?
Me? Okay. I don't know if this is allowed. Is this general questions also? Or just
This is, just so everyone appreciates, there's not always a comment back. This is audience comments, it's not really a town hall. So we're happy to receive your comments, but this is not really an exchange back and forth. Sometimes something lends itself to an easy response, but it's really not a back and forth. But please go ahead.
Fine. I'm Sheila Hull, his wife, and we are 150 years old together. And we live at 292.
Congratulations.
Yay! And so we live at 226 Edgedale Road. And I grew up with butterflies in the country. And when we moved to Pike almost 40 years ago, there were butterflies, there were brick sidewalks, there was wildlife, and there was balance, and there were flowers. And now we have been, our yard's been destroyed by deer. And the sad thing is that this is what really concerns me. Phragmites are taking over. And I don't know if people realize this is a terrible thing. It's like a cancer. It will destroy our ecosystem. And this came between our yards. Scott was a couple blocks away. And people don't realize when they let this stuff grow, it sends out millions of seeds, and then a little plant grows and the roots grow 14 feet. Nothing kills it. And Scott's going to try to help us get funding. And I know the mayor's been interested, but it's growing all along Brainerd Road. And it is terrible. So while I think sidewalks are a nice option, this to me is urgent. Because we won't have an ecosystem. It's going to be totally ruined by this invasive species which came from the Asian countries, and nothing can live in it, no habitat. It will cut your fingers if you try to rip it. No butterflies, no birds, nothing. So that's one reason we're seeing fewer bats and bees and butterflies, because there are no native flowers where this grows. And this grows like a field. Drive down Brainerd. It's sickening. Ever since they put in New Brainerd, I don't know exactly why. I think somehow it got overlooked by Beechwood. I don't know. The mayor has talked about it. We've talked about it. But nothing's being done, and this is urgent. So some people say 2 arms, 2 arms. The British are coming. 2 arms, 2 arms. The Phragmites are coming. We have got to deal with this. There will be no butterflies, no birds, no bees, no habitat. So I'll be quiet now. Manor it took them 25 years to try to kill it, and I think it's coming back. So it's a terrible, insidious cancer. We have to deal with it.
Thank you.
Thank
You are correct. Phragmites is a horrible invasive plant species, and it's something that needs to be addressed, and it's challenging to address it.
It has to be addressed, though. But there'll be no butterflies.
Just for clarification,
Sir,
comes to
we got one talk.
Oh, I'm very.
Thank you. In the back.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Good evening. My name is Paul Melby. I live at 31749 Gates Mills Boulevard. I've never been to a council meeting. Today I went riding with my 9-year-old on our bikes in yellow vests. Worried about traffic. We don't ride because of it. I've got 3 boys. I live on the end of Gates Mills that is not now in the trail plan. And I agree, please add our section. I'm not sure why that was never included in the original plan, but it only makes sense to me to be able to go all the way to Cedar, which eventually Mayfield will get smart and they'll connect with us. And so I ask that you please consider adding that even at this stage now. Next is thank you to the police. They've been sitting on Gates Mills, catching those people that come flying at 70 miles an hour. They hit that hill down there, and thank you very much for what you do. And my last one is, we elect the council to make some decisions. I believe that we elected you to make the decision on trails and sidewalks. And I work with data every day. I understand the survey. If we do a vote, it'll turn out the same. It'll just waste time. So I ask that we you all make that decision on our behalf. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome to a council meeting.
Thank you.
Me.
You.
Awesome. Tracy Simpson. I live at 2600 Butternut, and I had two pieces for consideration. One, for the Gates Mill Trail, is it a potential to use it as a precedent? And however the decision was made to do Gates Mills, could we do the same thing? Because I'm not familiar if it was something that was up at a popular vote or if it was done at the council. So I just wanted to put that up, that potentially was at the council, why couldn't we do the same thing? Or if it required a referendum, then maybe we have a precedent. Second piece was, if sidewalks are intended to encourage safe pedestrian traffic, I'd love to challenge the council to work with Moreland Hills on connecting Chagrin all the way to Som Center. It seems crazy to have a school that's so dangerous to walk around. So those are my 2 points. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? This part.
Gerard Bartasavage, 2960 Shaker Boulevard. I like the idea of a mock-up of the potential sidewalks. So I'd like to know how soon that could happen. I think it's important for the residents to see what it would possibly look like, because I think there's a lot of confusion over the sidewalks going in the side streets, which there was no talk about going in the side streets, just the main streets. So I'd like to know how soon that mock-up would be available for the residents to see. Mr. Sheehy, would you have that idea?
I don't know, is this on? Can I be heard?
We hear you.
Okay, well, the thought would be we would put together that bit of information for council to review. That can be done fairly quickly. If that's the choice is to move forward with Lander, then we would look at spots out along Lander, give some representative locations, and show what it would look like.
Just Lander?
The public will see it as soon as council sees it. Anyone else? In the back row.
Don Graham and wife Barb, who live at 2850. Actually, on the corner of Shaker, so it's really 3005, but anyway. We drive our car up Shaker Boulevard, park in the service department, and you can get a good workout going through the park all the way, part of Pepper Pike going all the way to Warrensville Center Road and back. I don't see a lot of Pepper Pike people using it. So putting all this new stuff in, is it going to get high usage?
Thank you. In the back.
My name is Angela Sotera. I live at 3.
You got to speak up, ma'am. Or
Sorry, Angela Sotera. I live at 3357 Lander Road. So I have a couple concerns about the frontage, like the 29 feet. Like, how's it really going to impact our yard? When I look out the front window, I'm thinking we're going to lose trees. We're going to lose a lot of our front yard. I also believe it should go to a vote. I don't think that I want to say this correctly. I believe the survey was 27% of the residents took the survey. Is that correct?
Yes.
Well, whatever. It's not. To me, it's not a great representation of who is for and against the sidewalk. So I believe it should go to vote, and the residents should have a say. And I also think that everyone, if they get a chance, drive down Lander Road and see how beautiful it is with all the trees and it's the greenery. And what's it going to look like with the sidewalks? Could you do a rendering of before and after? Like, here's what it looks like now. Here's what it'll look like when we put the sidewalks in. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Barbara Lowry, 28425 Shaker Boulevard. I believe it's important that the city optimize the walkability that we already have. People have mentioned they want to walk to retail, they want to walk to dining, they want to walk to groceries. You can walk. You can do Old Brainerd, you can do Kurzdale, you can do South Woodland. I don't know if people are in fact utilizing any of those existing walkways. Are they going up to Village Square? Are they going up to Eaton it's important that we optimize what we have first and evaluate that before we move forward with anything else. And then the second piece is that I support a ballot also. I think it will serve two purposes. It will help with the credibility of the decision. I think it will also help to raise awareness for those residents that have no idea that these discussions are even taking place. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Someone in the back there, I can see your hand. Can't see you. There you are.
Danielle Grantham, 30549 Shaker Boulevard. I have very mixed feelings about this sidewalk issue. I have a dog, I have a school-aged child. Initially, I thought it was great. Then, fast forward, we're enduring this sewer project right now, as will the other streets proposed for the sidewalk project. And I guess I feel at this point that I don't really understand why the proposed width is 5 feet and why it's even a consideration to use the maximum extent of the right-of-way when you're considering, in my section of Shaker, certainly 70-year-old existing infrastructure, 70, 80-year-old trees, 40, 50-year-old trees. My section of Shaker, which is between Lander and Somme, lost 90 mature trees as a result of the sewer project. How is this going to really impact the, and that was just my counting. My husband and I drove up and down both sides of the street and counted every tree that was tagged for removal. So, you know, we're just lay people. But, right, it really, and when I consider that this will be 5 feet wide and potentially, 17 feet onto my property, it will truly bisect my front lawn. My neighbors and I don't want that. Again, I am pro, from a walkability and a safety perspective, I am all for the idea of doing this, but to maximize the right-of-way and bisect our properties to do it seems a little bit like overkill to me, and much of my neighbors feel the same way. So I would just, first of all, support a referendum, so particularly for those of us directly impacted by the project, to really have an opportunity to have our say, to really feel out how those impacted feel about this. And in addition to that, if council is going to make this decision, I would really encourage you to please consider the existing infrastructure and perhaps the usage of the right-of-way to more of a minimum rather than the maximum allowed. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. And I just want to disabuse any misperception here. I don't think this council would ever support, I know I would never support a walkway that extended to the back end of a right-of-way near your home. Regardless of, are we entitled to do it? No one is suggesting that. I've never heard anyone. Did the engineer ever suggest that? I know it would not be supported. I'm pretty positive, confident of that. And you should, take, I think, some solace in that. And that's just not any design consideration that I've ever heard of about this project.
Thank you, Mayor.
Okay. Anyone else?
Tamara Rennick, 31350 South Woodland. I too am in favor of a referendum, and as the previous resident on the corner of Shaker attested and was visibly passionate about her position, it's important for us to know where these sidewalks are going to be. There are cost considerations to getting that information, but I think there have to be plans out there that where the utilities are, where some of the obstructions are, and I think it has to be, in order for us to make an informed decision on this, to have at least the 4 main roads you're talking about, Lander, Shaker, South Woodland, and Chagrin, have that information. Because you can't make an informed decision without knowing where these things are going to be. They are different than the Gates Mills project, because Gates Mills is on privately owned land or public sector land. This is not going on across people's lawns. And that is an entirely different proposition that you're proposing right now.
And I think it's very important, and it's especially important to those of us that live there. So respectfully, please give us that information.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes.
Hi, Deborah Dixon, 306 Tour Providence. Two things quickly. Has anyone done an analysis as far as what sidewalks will do to the value of the property? Will it increase it? Will it decrease it with, missing trees, etc.? So that's one question. The other is safety around, I guess we're calling Ursuline Circle. I don't know if there's a way to put cameras up, or at least pretend there's cameras up, but I see bicyclists, nobody stops at the signs. I see cars the other day, nobody stops at the stop sign. I'm not proposing lights, but I think some sort of deterrent should be considered to make that more of a safety concern.
Thank you. The police will monitor the situation, sir. Yes, sir.
I'm Leonard Will. I live at 2835 Shaker Boulevard, so just about half block from City Hall. I was reading the Engineering Society report about recreational trails, and I thought it interesting that the purpose of the recreational trail is to create safe pedestrian routes away from vehicular traffic along major highway or roads with higher traffic counts. Shaker Boulevard has been proposed as a site for a sidewalk or recreational trail, as the city's calling it. I do my own work because I believe it keeps me in shape at age 89. And that means riding my own tractor and doing my own lawn. Believe me, when I mow my front lawn, and what is known as the tree lawn, to the curbing, I am very, very careful because of oncoming traffic and my back to the traffic. I don't believe anybody is doing only 35 down that stretch between Edgedale and the circle. Part one. I hold my breath. I even stop and wait till I can sense them coming. So it's not really 100% safe from vehicular traffic with a sidewalk or without a sidewalk. The other aspect is that the other day I was going around the traffic circle. I was heading south on Brainerd, going around the traffic circle heading home, and I came to the intersection of Shaker West off the circle, and I was only about 5-10 feet from the intersection, and all of a sudden, in front of me comes a bicyclist off the sidewalk from the, basically from the Beechwood stretch of the sidewalk on that stretch. If I had been going more than 5 miles an hour or 8, whatever it was, or if he had been going another mile an hour more than, I wouldn't say it was 15 or what, but I would have hit him square or he'd have hit me. So there's not always safety. I lived a number of years in Europe. I served there in the military, and one of the first things they warned us about when we got assigned to Europe, beware of how you drive, because in Europe there are pedestrian ways and there are bicycle ways, and then there's the roadway. And if you're not used to it, you can run into a bicyclist or they can run into you because the bicyclist has the right of way. And it's just that something, if you're not aware of it, you could be involved in something very fast. And again, this was a mature adult riding the bicycle on a sidewalk at a speed, crossing the what I had assumed always as a walk path way. I don't know that he was even allowed out. But there are dangers to report, even when there are only our sidewalks about vehicular traffic and pedestrian walkways. If there's only 5 feet or 4 feet separating the walkway from the curbing, it's always a danger. Thank you.
Thank you. Are we done? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Sandy Holmes. I live at 31699 Trillium Trail, and I just want to say thank you to everyone who is here. I'm new to Pepper Pike. I found this really informative. I came with sort of one thought in my mind when I came, and listening to all of you has been really educational for me. And I don't like to walk on major thoroughfares in this town because I feel like it's taking your life in your hands. But I recognize that it has a lot of impact on people's views, their feelings about their own property, and I think that's a really important mix, and I think council is approaching this in a very thoughtful way. I covered Shaker Heights City Council meetings for 30 years as a stringer for the Plain Dealer, so it's been really informative to listen to you and your thought process. So I just want to thank you all.
Thank you, ma'am. Is that it? Okay. We are, appreciate everyone being here. We'll be back next week.
Before we adjourn, I just wanted to check where our next meeting will be. Do we know, and we should probably...
I don't know
What are
about the
our
availability.
feelings?
I
Okay.
don't.
Okay. Sorry.
Okay? That's it. We stand adjourned.